This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. There's nothing sweeter than baking cookies during the holidays. With Prime, I get all my ingredients delivered right to my door, fast and free, no last-minute store trips needed. And of course, I blast my favorite holiday playlist on Amazon Music. It's the ultimate soundtrack for creating unforgettable memories. From streaming to shopping, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to get more out of whatever you're into.
70,000 people are here, and Bob Dylan is the reason for it.
Inspired by the true story.
For anyone who's going to hold your attention on a stage, you have to kind of be a freak.
Are you a freak?
Hope so.
And starring Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan. He defied everyone.
Turn it down!
Play loud!
To change everything.
Make some noise, BD.
Timothée Chalamet, Edward Norton, Elle Fanning, Monica Barbaro. A complete unknown. Only in theaters Christmas Day. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Hello there and welcome to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. It's Friday the 13th of December and it's time for our weekly roundup of the latest stories from the City Ground in our Friday 5 roundup. And we'll also have a preview of the Aston Villa match, which is obviously happening on Saturday evening. In just a second, I'm going to be joined by Baz to discuss the stories. But first, let's find out what's happening at the City Ground. So it's over to Jamie Martin at the 1865 news desk.
Hi, this is Jamie Martin with this week's top 5 Forest stories from the 1865 news desk. The headline to this week's news: Forest target spoke out on Reds' interest. This week, following a flurry of reports suggesting Nottingham Forest hold interest in Corinthians forward Yuri Alberto, the player himself spoke to the media about his dream, but also current circumstances. In an interview with Benny and Mermucho, per court offside, Yuri Alberto described the Premier League as his dream, but insisted that he was very happy at Corinthians and wished to see the year out. He also joked with teammates about each trip being their last, but that he really is happy for now in Brazil. But by no means does that rule out a move, if it could happen. Forest are expected to monitor his situation, if not make an offer, with the club also holding interest in Igor Jesus, Botafogo's 23-year-old striker. Second piece of news this week: Forest have hosted a Christmas party for young children. This Christmas marks the start of a new campaign by Nottingham Forest, as discussed last week. Home for Christmas, as the campaign is called, was started to bring together everyone associated with the club, hosting various events and activities for the community. This week, Forest hosted children, including Warriors United, at the City Ground, with players, staff and all associated with the club involved to give the children a brilliant Christmas experience at the club. Another excellent example of how Forest are moving to support the community. Third piece of this news this week is that Chris Wood has become the club's all-time top scorer in the Premier League. Following his goal against Manchester United, Kiwi superstar Chris Wood has set another record, cementing himself into Forest history. After a cross from Gibbs-White, Wood met the ball sweetly with his head, and thanks to good direction mixed with some poor defending, it flew into the net, meaning Wood was up to 10 goals for the season and surpassing that of Brian Roy, who previously had 24 goals in the Premier League. Chris Wood now has 25 and is the top scorer. He continues to prove his doubters wrong and will continue to do so, I'm sure. Who would have thought this back in January 2023? Now, the fourth piece of this news is related to transfers once again, though, and it is involving a Forest youngster who is subject to loan interest after B-team good performances. After a successful season so far, Joe Gardner has attracted interest from various sides in the football pyramid, with his first professional loan on the horizon. According to transfers journalist Peter Rourke, Joe Gardner, Forest B-team forward, is of interest to various sides, including local side Notts County, with Doncaster Rovers, Morecambe and Harrogate Town also interested in securing a temporary move. The youngster continues to impress and will bring you more updates on his progress and indeed more on potential transfer news in the coming weeks. Now, the final piece of news though, another Forest youngster is finding success, nominated for Player of the Month award. After an incredibly successful start to his loan at Colchester United, Forest loanee Jamie McDonnell has been nominated for the league's Player of the Month award. Since arriving in the south in the summer, McDonnell has continued to grow at the club with recent performances including a last gasp goal, earning him a nomination for League Two's Player of the Month award. Regardless of the outcome of the award, a brilliant achievement for the Forest youngster with a bright future ahead of him. And it's also worth praising Forest's work to open pathways for these young stars to develop and get some game time away from their home club. That is the latest though from the 1865 news desk. I'm Jamie Martin. Be sure to catch up with me on Twitter, or as it's known as X, via @I'mJamieMartin. Forest news throughout the week. Take care. We'll see you next week.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and welcome to you, Baz. Obviously, it's been quite a heady week for Forest supporters. I remember you and I listening to the last Forest win away at Old Trafford on Radio Nottingham as a number 10 from Stafford put the ball home and prompted a famous victory for the Reds away at Man United. So how did last week feel for you?
It was very, very, very good. It's especially after the other Manchester game earlier in the week, it was just nice to see us getting something out of the game. And actually, even more pleasing was in the first half, after their first goal, I thought we were going to get ripped to pieces. But actually, the second half, apart from again, they scored, but we basically shut them out. They looked pretty clueless, and that's as Morg said afterwards, there was a tactical little tweak, and that seemed to work.
Yeah, and we'll have more on that a little bit later. But for now, let's talk about the first story that Jamie brought us, which is the interest that Forest apparently have in Yuri Alberto from Corinthians. Obviously, I think there's a bit of extra focus upon this now, as Forest have got the link with Corinthians, having signed Murillo, most notably. And Alberto seems quite willing to make comments suggesting that he's quite keen on a move to the Premier League and potentially to be around some of his fellow countrymen. I think the key thing here is, look, I'm going to be honest, I don't follow Brazilian football enough to know anything about Yuri Alberto or Ego Jesus, but clearly Forest are in the market to sign players from places like Brazil to try and get, Murillo's proven to be a bargain, and they won't all work out that way. But as well as looking in those markets, Forest are clearly looking for a striker. Yeah,
I mean, that's always been my main worry. We signed Anderson to cover for Gibbs White. The next sort of area where we do worry about cover is obviously Chris Wood, who's on form, but Taiwo doesn't seem to be. So, yeah, getting a striker in is probably a good thing to do. I don't follow Brazilian football, but I had a quick look at Alberto's stats, and they do look pretty impressive. He seems to be like a decent striker, but obviously it's whether he can make the transition is going to be the question. And his interviews and the things that he's been saying, kind of basically saying, I want to go, but I don't want to be seen to be going.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is worth pointing out, and this is something that Maradona in the Midlands has talked about in previous podcasts, is I think when you're signing a Danilo or a Murillo, a young man who is looking to come to Europe to grow his career, then that fills you with a lot more confidence than, for example, a Gustavo Scarpa, who I think we all liked him and we all saw that he had ability. But if you're not coming to Europe until you're maybe 27, 28 years old, then the question being, how well will you be able to grow and adapt into the Premier League or into the European game? And Alberto's youth, perhaps a positive factor?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about Murillo the other day, and there was a couple of videos.
I know you think about Murillo most days, don't you?
I do think about Murillo a lot. But yeah, they did like the video for the Home for Christmas thing. And I just commented, like, his English has got really, really good. And if you think back to when he arrived with us, like not only had he only played 13 professional games in full, but there was also that incident when they did the Remembrance Day thing, and like he ran out to comfort the lad. And you think he's obviously a really, really nice person, but because he came so young as well, it makes him more adaptable. It means that he's more capable of learning the language. Obviously, Scarpa already knew the language, but and adapting to a different type of life. Obviously, there's always risks with that, but yeah, I think going for young players who want to make a name for themselves, them is kind of, yeah, it's a good strategy to go for.
Yeah, I do have to say as well. I mean, Murillo's English. He's fluent now, isn't he? And it was only at the end of last season he gave his first interview to Colin Fray, and although you could tell he understood, he wasn't confident expressing himself yet. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he put himself forward for that interview, saying, "This is the way I'm going to get better at English." And now, yeah, he's fluent. His last couple of like video clips, his English has been really good. So these are really positive signs. Let's move on and let's talk about Jamie's second story, which was the Christmas campaign. I mean, certainly, if any Forest fans haven't seen the videos that Forest have put out with the Christmas meet and greet, I suppose, involving Warriors FC and various other parties. There are players from the men's, women's, B teams concerned and involved as well. Obviously, Nuno having a slight Santa type look about him with his grey beard. I mean, as Jamie said, it is one of the key things that no matter what else is going on, Mr. Marinakis is very keen to put Forest and back home at Olympiacos and in Portugal, Rio Ave, very keen to put the clubs at the heart of the community.
Definitely. It's an excellent strategy by him. It's obviously something that he believes strongly in. I can remember there was a documentary the other day on Sky, which I've not seen yet, but I saw an interview that one of the journalists did with him in the lead up to it. And what came across from the piece was that he believes in football and the power of football to connect with the people in that town. So obviously he's done that in Piraeus in Athens, and he's doing it here. And you can see that in pretty much everything the club does.
And the other thing that's worth saying, so when Nuno was first appointed as the Forest head coach, we had my friend and Wolves fan Matt Langham on to talk about Nuno's influence. And he was saying, well, Nuno is generally kind of fairly reserved and quiet. But he also said, I can see a player like Ryan Yates becoming a figure like Conor Cody had been at Wolves, where he's his club mouthpiece. And the very first person we see in the video about the Home for Christmas campaign is Yatesy saying, Nottingham's got a really bad problem with poverty and many of our communities could do with a little bit of help. So two things there. Number one, Yatesy's always been a great ambassador. That's one of the reasons he's the club captain, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then number two, I would also say in there, I think Nuno, I don't know if this is just age and experience, but he's playing the PR game a lot more these days, and he's doing a very good job of it.
I think there's two things. So one, the other thing I noticed about Ryan Yates was he repeatedly called him Mr. Marinakis, showing him a little bit of respect there. The other thing with Nuno,
I suspect that might be dictated to by the big guy himself.
Yeah, but yeah, Nuno, I've noticed. Obviously, his demeanour all the time is much happier than it was last season.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time last season.
He's a warm, cuddly guy with a big white beard. So what more could you want as we approach Christmas?
But he's also, he's because of that, he's opening up, and he's like, I think he's very, very funny. He's very dry in his sense of humour. He just puts these little things in his interviews that you think, you're just taking the piss a little bit there, aren't you? And so he's in obviously the first Warriors United video that came out. He came across really, really well, very, very warm. So it's definitely a progression from how I remember him at Wolves.
Do you like chips?
I love them. Ooh, I love them. With a lot of ketchup on it.
And you know what? I think I'd possibly quite like to be friends with Nuno. With that in mind, let's take just a very short break and we'll be back with the rest of the stories in just a minute. Hi, it's Rich here, and thanks, as always, for listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. You may have heard that Billy Davies is going to be doing a gig. Yes, he is coming to the Albert Hall in Nottingham in February to talk about his time at Nottingham Forest, and he will be joined by a few familiar faces, such as Wes Morgan, Lee Camp, and Terry the Kitman. Well, I just want to let you know that we are soon going to have an exclusive giveaway and more details relating to this event. So keep tuned in to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Hey, it's Austin James. Yes, I'm living with diabetes, but it doesn't have to define me. Thanks to the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor, I get real-time glucose readings throughout the day. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor is small and easy to wear, giving me the freedom to focus on my life as a parent and a musician. Now this is progress. You can get a free sensor at freestylelibre.us.
Offer available for people who qualify. Visit myfreestyle.us to see all terms and conditions. Certain exclusions apply. Data on file. Abbott Diabetes Care. For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Welcome back to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast, with me, Rich Ferraro, and him, Baz. And Baz, we saw a new record at the weekend as Chris Wood has stood at the top of the all-time Premier League scoring charts for Forest. Now, I think we'll put in the caveat that football didn't actually begin in 1992, and we're both old enough to remember the pre-Premier League days. And so to me, Forest's top goal scorer in my lifetime will always be Nigel Clough, because, well, he's got the record. But
90-something for him.
I think in the league, I think it's actually 100 odd. But, you know, in true Wikipedia fashion, citation needed. Someone listening to this will know it off by heart. Now, the other thing that's worth pointing out is that just like Stan Collymore, Chris Wood has done this in an astonishingly good goal-to-game ratio, hasn't he? Stan only really played, I think, it's like something like 30-odd games in the Premier League and scored 24 goals or something ridiculous for us. And Woody, because it took him a little while to actually get in the team, Taiwo was scoring goals. Even last season, we saw Woody, Taiwo was the first choice until he got injured. So his goals to game ratio is really astonishing. And that speaks for a lot of things. Firstly, when he first joined us, he didn't look fit enough. But since then, when he's been out injured, he's come back and hit the ground running. And of course, that's something that Taiwo's struggling with at the moment. So do you reckon that is to do with age and experience and how he looks after himself?
Yeah, I'm just speculating, but I can remember Taiwo didn't have a pre-season because he had some personal issues, is what they said. So that's obviously going to impact his fitness and his ability to get going again. Plus, whatever the personal issues are, maybe they're preying on his mind as well. Whereas Chris Woods, Nuno was saying the other day about how well he looks after himself, how he makes sure he eats properly and does all the right things. So obviously that's going to work in Woody's favour. We've also got to say the way the team is set up is to play to his strengths as well. Because maybe when Chris Wood first arrived and under Steve Cooper, we had Taiwo carrying the ball from deep, and Taiwo is very, very good at that. But that's not really Wood's game as much. He can do it, but it's not what he's built around. And the way we're set up now is for Chris Wood. So, yeah, long may it continue. I did read as well somewhere that he has the highest conversion rate in Europe this season. So,
yeah, I mean, he's just been a machine in so many ways. Mm-hmm. I think we can forgive him that miss at Man City because we don't know if it actually would have made a difference. It might have done, but every player will miss a chance now and again. I mean, the other thing that I'll just also say is that I think is in one of the early matches where Nuno was in charge, and Chris Wood did say it makes a massive difference as well as a striker when you're playing just 20 yards closer to the goal. And that's something that even when Forest have been set up to defend, the setup is very different from the Steve Cooper low block, isn't it? Because the whole team played very deep in the Cooper low block, whereas now there's a little bit more, I suppose, a bit of an accordion / concertina type effect when Forest are defending and attacking with those quick breaks. So, it plays to his strengths. And I did say we'd hark back to the Man United match. Now, unfortunately, this arrived too late for us to put into our match report, but your friend and Manchester United fan, Steve, did provide us with a few thoughts after the game. And I think it's fair to say he wasn't that happy.
Yeah, going into the game, I really fancied us. Thought we'd had a bad game with Arsenal the other week, but I thought we'd come back maybe a little overconfident, obviously a horrific nightmare start for us, but with our own system now, we're still liking the new guy, new system, playing good football, but we are fragile at the back, and there is still mental fragility in this team, and I think that's what we saw there. Felt that we would come back into the game. Obviously when we got the equaliser before half time, I thought we'd knock on them, but fair play to you guys. I had a quick look through the stats, and I think we say low XG, only 3 shots on target, and 29% possession. But that just points to you guys being clinical. And I think 2 seasons ago we would have come back in that second half and knocked you off. But you're a different team now. You're doing really well. You're knocking on as a club. You can see that you've stopped looking down the table and worried about relegation. You're starting to look up it, far ahead of us in the league, and that realistically, European football is a genuine opportunity for you this season. And there's a long way to go, but that's on there. I was trying to make myself feel better by saying it could have been worse, because I was originally going to take Baz to the game, but a communication error between me and my brother, that didn't happen. But it would have been truly horrific sitting in the East Stand with Baz as he was jumping up and down. I would definitely got in trouble for bringing a Forest fan in there, because I don't even think he could have contained himself. It could have been worse from us, but fair play to Forest. You were the better team. You're clinically better for us in front of goal, and we've got to learn from it. And I hope you guys have a good rest of the season. Let's hope you're not above us by the end of the year. All the best. Thanks, guys.
Okay, Baz, first things first, would you have been jumping up and down next to Steve if you'd been at Old Trafford last Saturday?
Last time I went and sat in the home end with him, he spent the entire game going, shut up, or get kicked out. So, maybe I could have sat on my hands or something, but it would have been difficult.
And secondly, do you agree with some of his assessment that actually Forest are looking up rather than down, even allowing for example, the Newcastle, Man City and Arsenal matches?
Yeah, I think it's, in a way, it's kind of good, those games, because it shows we're not right at the top of the league. We're not that level yet, but certainly I can remember maybe even 2 seasons ago when we played teams like Palace, who were sat mid-table, or West Ham, who were sat mid-table, and thinking, actually, we're as good as them, but they just happened to get the breaks and get the 3 points. Whereas now we're getting the breaks and getting the 3 points. So I think top half will be an amazing finish for it. The other thing I noticed, I didn't realise this on the day, was in the Man United game, we only got 3 shots on target, put 3 goals out of them.
Yeah, and it didn't feel like that, though, did it? It really did. I mean, I'm going to go back to what you said right at the start of this podcast, which is, in hindsight, the thing that's most amazing. Yeah, it's brilliant to score in the first minute, and it's brilliant to score 3 goals away from home. But we absolutely shut them out in those last 20 minutes, didn't we? Totally killed the game. And what was actually a really, probably quite an entertaining game for the neutral for the first 65, 70 minutes, probably was deadly dull, apart from Andre Onana wasting his own time in stoppage time, because Forest killed it totally dead. I'd also like to throw in a little stat, which is that until the Man City match, Forest hadn't conceded a goal with Morato on the pitch, and now he's started the clock going again. And certainly, if I was faced with a defence containing Milenkovic and Morato, I'd run the other way, wouldn't you?
I'm really, really impressed with him. He's such a good defender. The way to be able to get up to speed when you come on, in the 70th minute, to be able to get up to speed and not put a foot wrong in that way is a skill of its own.
Yeah. And just to get your opinion on something very quickly. So I mentioned this when I was talking to Adam after the Man City match. When Morato comes on and we go to a back three, it does mean Milenkovic going to the right hand side because obviously Murillo and Morato are both left footed. Do you reckon there's some scope maybe to play Murillo on the right hand side so that Milenkovic as the big man, as the obvious kind of fulcrum of that defence can stay in the middle? What do you think?
I don't know actually, because I mean, part of it is it kind of depends how we're set up as well. Because if we're in a back three and the wing backs go forward, then yeah, I'd worry about that a little bit. Having a winger coming onto Murillo, I know Adam talked about it how Milenkovic got done by Doku, but yeah, I wouldn't want necessarily a left footer with a right footed winger coming onto him in that way. But
Well, I'm just going to point out that I think it was while Nuno was still in charge that Max Kilman, as a left-footed centre back, used to play the right side of a back three for Wolves. So just throwing that out there. We'll see how that develops. But in the meantime, let's move on. And I'm just going to combine the last two stories. So Joe Gardner, who's making great waves for the B team at the moment. There's loan interest in him. Potentially Notts County, Donny Rovers, or Harrogate Town. This seems like a really obvious bit of progression. A player who's doing really well, young man, needs to get some experience of playing first team professional football. And if we're going to do that, why not send him to a club who are playing at a reasonable lower league level, who are also reasonably local to Nottingham? Makes sense, doesn't it?
yeah, absolutely. I think I've seen him play once. He came on as a sub in a cup game or something, and I can remember being quite impressed with him then. Obviously, you can't tell with a young player. It's about building up consistency. That's how you get to be a really good player. But yeah, he made an impression on me that time, so I was impressed with him.
And if I'm right, and again, I'm sure there'll be people listening who'll be able to correct me, although he's essentially a forward-facing midfielder, he's more or less been playing as a striker this season because of the other players who've gone out on loan, including actually Jamie McDonnell, who was part of our final story, who's got a Player of the Month nominee for League Two while on loan at Colchester. And I'm just going to echo something that our Jamie said in his news report, which is, in this case, it's not the winning that counts, it's the taking part. Just to get nominated as a Player of the Month nominee for the entire league when you're a youngster on loan. What an achievement.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I don't know much about him, but that's like, yeah, Player of the Month is a good thing to get. And yeah, to be able to stand out. And when you're a lone player as well, it's difficult sometimes to fit in because you almost like it. It's known that you're not going to be there next season. So to get into that and to force yourself in to get recognition in that way is a great achievement.
And you never know how it's going to turn out for young players because obviously we know that there's a good degree of attrition and some players that you hope are going to go on and make it doesn't quite work out. But thinking about young Forest players out on loan, making an impression and making a name for themselves in the game, well, our very own skipper Ryan Yates, that's what he did back in the day. And, I'm not saying that that's necessarily going to be the fate of every young player who's out on loan, but it's a really good start if you're trying to make your name in football. Let's just finish off with a little look forward to what's happening this weekend. So Forest are playing Aston Villa, and I think the thing that's really worth noting is that Forest are actually above Villa in the table, which I wouldn't have predicted at the start of the season. And a couple of things to note. So the first one is that Alex Moreno, obviously he sat out the Man United match, but he is going to have to sit out this one as well because he's obviously on loan from Villa. So it means that he is going to be ineligible to play in this particular game. I've been really impressed with Nico the couple of matches he's coming at left back, haven't you?
Yeah, I think he's done really well. That's kind of he's improved since he joined us. In general, I don't think there's many. I can't really think of any occasions where he's had a terrible game for us. So yeah, it wasn't a surprise for him to step in like that. And I think Moreno's looked a little bit just a little bit in some of the games we got defeated. He looked a little bit kind of. We always had this like feeling that he was probably better going forward than defending, and maybe that showed itself. Whereas Nico's added that little bit of extra solidity to us.
Yeah, and who'd have thought when we signed him that we'd be saying that Nico's a better defender than the other option in that position? I mean, Moreno, I think that because he tends to charge around quite a lot, doesn't he? And it means that there have been a few times that he's got caught out of position. And Nico's positional sense is the thing that I would say has really, really improved. I think it's also worth pointing out that Nico is the regular left wing back for Wales. So I think that's possibly influenced the decision to keep Aina on the right and play Nico on the left. So that's something that's worth pointing out. Other lines from Nuno's press conference: no new big issues regarding injuries. So we're still missing Danilo and Sangare, as we know. He reflected on the Man United match, and he's talked about the idea about managing the game out. But he also wanted to point out that in terms of how the season's going, Forest have achieved nothing yet. It is just that thing about staying focused, looking for improvement, because there's always got to be improvement to be made. And also, he's saying that, thinking about Europe or whatever isn't going to be particularly helpful. When asked if there are raised expectations, he said, and I quote, "I'm not listening to that, but I don't go too much away from my house," which I think is a really funny little point.
Again, he's funny.
He is funny, yeah. And then he did also talk about Chris Wood becoming the all-time Premier League scorer, and he talked about community and saying, reflecting upon the campaigns that are going on there. Last but not least, a bit of a curveball question. He was asked about the 2034 World Cup being held in Saudi Arabia, and it's worth remembering that Nuno's last managerial job was in Saudi. He said, "My personal experience was good, very welcome and well treated," but he also ended, "You have to make sure everyone is going to be safe and enjoy the game. This is what is more important." So is that a little bit of diplomacy from the gaffer there?
I think so, yeah. He obviously doesn't want to put his foot in it, but I think, again, a little subtle dry dig going in.
Yeah. And do you think that maybe he is also he's less hostile to the idea of the World Cup being held there, having worked there? I'm not pinning anything against him, because obviously he went there for a job. He probably earned enough money to keep him and his family secure for several years in terms of their kind of standard and style of living. So in those cases, it's hard to criticise people for wanting to secure their family's future.
And also, if you're coming off the back of the Spurs job where he was just lambasted, even though he was third choice manager there.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to say is thank you very much to Jamie. Thank you to you, Baz, for joining us. And obviously, we will be back with a match report. We'll have George presenting on the weekend after the game against Aston Villa, which obviously we hope will come up with a good result and more progress for Forest. So join us after the weekend's match. And until then, come on, you Reds.
Podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in more places that could expose you more to identity theft. But LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, our US-based restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Don't face drained accounts, fraudulent loans, or financial losses alone. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year with promo code NEWS. Visit LifeLock.com. Terms apply.